I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker today, who happens to also be our host. He's the creative director at the Portland Center Stage. I remember when Chris Coleman moved to Portland in 2000, the Portland theater scene was extremely excited to have him here in our town. To say he's accomplished is quite the understatement. He's directed and adapted plays all over the country at the best theaters around the country. And he's been here ever since, and the Portland art scene has been all the richer because of his involvement. He's going to come and speak about his creative process, and then he's also going to bring on two very special guests who he's going to introduce. They're going to talk about a collaboration that they did this year and about their creative processes. Would you please welcome Chris Coleman.
Are you ready? Yeah. You guys spread yourselves out. That's so strange. No gathering together. So when Steve asked me to come and talk about the creative process, that was a strange request. Normally I'm asked to talk about how creativity spurs economic development in the city, or how the arts community is growing, or how collections on the arts tax are doing or not doing. So it took a minute to think about, and I considered kind of coming to you guys and talking about the history of the American theater from the beginning in 1820. But I thought it might be more interesting to have a couple of actors that I really love and admire come and talk with us today, and we just have a conversation about how you get inside somebody else's skin. So please join me in welcoming Sasha Roiz and Silas Weir Mitchell. Sasha has on a new pair of shoes. Just
thank you for noticing your boots.
So guys, we're not going to talk about Grimm. Maybe we can talk about Grimm in a minute. But we got to work on a play last spring called 3 Days of Rain by Richard Greenberg. Each of these guys had to play two different characters in two different time periods. So I want to talk about how you get inside their skin. And Sasha, I'm going to talk with you first.
Okay.
Okay, so you read the play. We read the play, and the two of you decided, yes, this is interesting. Looks like it'd be complex, meaty roles. Okay, then we decided to do it. All right, then you're at home working on it. You're reading it. So what's the next step in the process for you to try to figure out how to understand what's going on in the play and how to get inside these guys?
I like to read the material, especially when it's a play and it's so bulletproof. I like to read it as many times as I can for clues. There's always something that I miss the first time, second time, third time, even the 10th time. There's things that will appear, and then finally when I feel very comfortable with the investigative part of it, then I'll start to maybe reflect on my own life and things in my life that could contribute to, or at least make sense to me, that I could parallel with this particular character and whatever he's going through. That's basically how I do it, and then I leave the rest to the magic of rehearsal and the run of the show.
So when you give me an example of a clue that you found
in that play, well, I mean, I haven't thought about the play in a few months, but that
it's by Richard Greenberg.
Richard rings a bell. I mean, it was, there was a lot of math to be done in that play, particularly because there was so much time jumping. And so the first half took place in 1995, the second half took place in 1960, is it? It was 1960. And the characters themselves are speaking about them, their particular childhoods and how old they were in certain times. And my character was a friend of the brother and sister character. And so I was just trying to constantly do the timeline, do the math of like, well, how old would he have been at that place and time, and how old would they have been, and then how did that all formulate, and so there was like a mystery to unravel because it was not laid out for us, and all of that was in the dialogue, so you had to kind of comb through it and really just piece it all together until it just made sense as a straight timeline, and there was tons of that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Silas?
Hello. What's the frequency?
Oh, there we go, there we go. Okay, so same question. You're sitting at home, you're working on it, you're beginning to try to find your way inside it. Okay, so you said, I think at one point in one interview you said, it's like osmosis. You just read it and read it and read it, and then it starts to kind of, you start to find yourself imagining your way in. Is there anything more specific that happens when you're reading it and reading it and reading it?
Yeah, definitely. I think people take sort of imagination for granted in a way. Like they think it's just sort of what happens, that you pretend, you know, if you tell someone what do you do as an actor, you say, I pretend to be other people. They're like, yeah, right, and it's like, well, no, you don't actually need an and, because that kind of is it. And it's a really deep thing if you burrow into it. So to me, the luxury of time that we had on this project is something that is very rare in theater. I mean, I think mostly people show up, they get the job, they show up for rehearsals for I don't know how many weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. We had months where we knew we were doing this play. And so I do the same thing that Sasha was saying. I read it and read it and read it and read it, and then there is something specific that happens at a certain point where you're not just bathing in the thing anymore, which is a lovely period when you don't have to worry about anything, you don't have to worry about how you're doing it, you don't have to worry about, you just get to bathe in the world of the story. And then at a certain point for me, I do start to pick particular things that pop out at me and meditate on those. Like, you know, in the opening monologue, there's so much information about my past as Walker, about living with my father and who these people were. You find one thing that you can really chew on, and that might be the entranceway in. What kind of guy was my dad? I think I had a fraught relationship with my father because I was this kind of person and he was that kind of person. And if I can pick one thing out that I said about my father, like he never spoke, right? He hardly ever spoke. There's some line about that. Then you think about, what is it like living with a person who's your father, who's this powerful guy, who doesn't ever talk to you? And then it made me realize, well, you know, from a child's point of view, if the father doesn't act like he loves you, then essentially he doesn't to the child. The father may love you, but the kid doesn't know that. The kid needs, so then you meditate on that, and it's you start burrowing in specifically to specific things. But it really does begin with just sort of a process of basking in the story and finding things that poke out at you, and then you're like, ooh, why does that poke out at me? And you go all the way in. And then it becomes more and more real, and it sort of builds on itself, because the more real it becomes, the easier it is to meditate on. It's hard to meditate on something vague. So, you know, it kind of snowballs.
You know, you said 2 words that I want to pick up on, Sasha. You said you imagine what it's like to have a father that is blah, 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 blah. Because I think it's a key part of the process that may be, I mean, it's probably different for each medium, but it's certainly different than literary analysis, where you're standing back and watching or looking at the story and the construction of the story. In this case, your job is to find a way to imagine your way inside it. And you do this all the time. You whether it's about the movie star that you fantasized about kissing last night, or the money that you fantasized about, you know, winning, or you fantasized about going to the gym tomorrow or this morning. Maybe you actually did it.
Even that word fantasize doesn't necessarily mean good. A fantasy is just something that you imagine. It's not like going to the gym, it's like, oh, I can't wait.
Right. But it's something that happens naturally in our minds, in our imaginations, and what these guys do is train that facility. So talk to me about that. You had 2 characters. What was the distinction between the characters, and how did you begin to imagine your way inside?
The 2, did people see the play? Yeah. Just lie.
4.
Anyway, good play, as you know. Anyway, there were 2 characters that I played. One was, who did I play again? Hip. I'm just kidding. The first one was Pip, and he was very...
He had great hair.
He had great big wig. But Pip never stopped talking, so it was very easy to understand where he was coming from because there was so much on the page, and he seemed to have dealt with things. He seemed to be as grounded as he could be amongst these three sort of satellite characters that were just constantly spinning. And his father, who he didn't know, who passed away when Pip was very young, was a lot more difficult, and it took me a lot longer to discover that character because
You played the father also.
I played the father in the second act, and so there was a lot less on the page in some way, or at least less about himself. He didn't really speak the way Pip does. Pip has this big old monologue right in the beginning of the play, and he introduces himself, he talks about himself. It was much easier to get a sense of the guy. Whereas Theo was a little bit more of a mystery, and that came later on. I mean, you know, we would uncover it in rehearsal, and even during the run of the performance, the actual play, like things would start to fall into place, and it was you would just discover these little things in moments with you know, certainly with Theo, where it was like things would inform him, you know, would inform my performance, and I would.
You were working with a dialect that was different.
I was working with a dialect which sometimes helps you and sometimes feels like you're, you know, blocked from getting into the character.
How do you figure that out?
It felt time appropriate. It was 1960. It was New York. It was this northeastern, in you know, very sort of educated crowd, and it felt like it needed something to kind of bridge the gap between myself and that time and that character, and it helped me step into that character a little bit more. And but yeah, the pieces of Theo sort of came into place by, again, just through the rehearsal, through the performances, and it would sort of, you know, these sentiments would just kind of like would just kind of fall into place. Anyway.
So have you guys noticed this person over here drawing? I'm just like, what is up with that? What are you drawing?
Well, I'm drawing what he's talking about. So I'm drawing like a picture of really, you know, the two characters, and then some of the key points that
Oh my God,
read the
that's
script
amazing.
for clues, and that clue is here, and then it was about math, and there's a timeline involved. And then,
I'm very afraid of, okay, what we're going to say next. And then they had sex. No.
What is
So you said, okay, so two things.
Yes.
Silas.
Yes.
In rehearsals once you said that your favorite acting teacher that you worked with for a long time in LA said that acting is a state of mind.
Correct.
What's that mean?
This was an epiphany moment for him. About 50 years ago. He's been teaching for years and years and years and years and years. And he was asked one day, he was in New York studying to be a director. And I forget what school he was at, but he was studying to be a director, and one day the acting teacher was out, he was sick, I forget why, and the dean said, hey, Harry, his name is Harry Mastro, George, the dean said, Harry, will you take over this guy's class today? And Harry's like, but I'm not here to be a teacher, I'm here to be a director. I don't know. He's like, just do it for, he's out, he's got the flu, just deal with it. So Harry has no idea what he's going to do because he's never thought of himself as a teacher, so he walks into this room. And he's never taught a day in his life. And out of his soul comes the first thing he said to the first group of students, to the first time ever that he taught. He says, acting is a state of mind. He doesn't know where it came from. But he has dedicated the last 50 years to this idea. And that's what I was saying earlier about how people think, oh, imagination, yeah, duh. It's like, yeah, duh, but it's also something, as you just said, it's a function that is intrinsic. And so people tend to kind of ignore it because it's just there, like consciousness. But if you go into consciousness, my God, right? It's massive. Imagination is a function of our humanity. Like, maybe dogs dream, maybe they don't, but our imagination is very, very highly developed as a species. It's where everything comes from. I mean, Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. And he came up with the idea of traveling through, you know, the speed of light by imagining himself on the head of a light beam as it moved through space. That's just that's imagination work. And so that's the idea of acting being a state of mind. What he's getting at root, I think, is the idea that Acting is not a technique to be applied to a problem. Acting is a way of conceiving of the use of one's imagination. It's a state of mind in regards to something that is an intrinsic human function. We're always talking about acting as a child in relation to the story. Innocent, vulnerable, open, porous, permeable to the story, and trying to find a way to commune with the story rather than coming at the story as something to be manipulated or managed or wrought into your own life. It's not about you, it's about the story. So this one little nugget that he said in his first day became the thesis for his 50-year teaching career, and it's a very rich idea. And you know, what you said earlier about it's a function that we as actors and others, writers certainly, we practice this function that is intrinsic. I think that's what acting as a state of mind is kind of about.
You know, I'm reading a biography of Tennessee Williams right now, getting ready for a production of Streetcar Named Desire in the spring. I was just reading last night that he said that he realized early in his writing career that he had a theater inside of him. He didn't grow up in the theater. He came late to the theater. And when he wrote his first play, he didn't even know what a proscenium was or anything. But then he realized that he had a theater inside of him, and what he meant by that was when he sat to write, he was hearing the sounds, he was smelling the smells, and he was seeing the costume. And so when you read his plays, and it's got all of these stage directions and like irritating amount of stage directions about the music and stuff in Streetcar Named Desire, and you're thinking, geez, shut up. And you're realizing that's what he was hearing, and he wanted to put it on the page. So again, he had found an ability, and of course it was tricky, because if you go too far, you can go nuts. So figuring out how that energy moves through you, how you enter that imaginary world in a full way that allows you to embody the character and not go crazy is a real challenge, and that he didn't always successfully navigate.
And that's different than method acting. Like method acting is the thing where you make it about you. You know, the imaginary world thing is different than method. I think taking the imaginary world really, really, really seriously is different than what people call method acting. For example, Daniel Day-Lewis, you know, he likes to be referred to as his character's names, you know what I mean, when he's off stage.
I like to be referred to as a captain.
Oh, captain, my captain. But that is different than method acting, because what you're doing, instead of saying this is about my father and I'm going to go, you know, brood about my own life, he's living in an imaginary thing, and I don't know about taking it that far, but I certainly appreciate that more than I appreciate the kind of like watching someone on stage or on screen thinking about their own life. It doesn't interest me.
Yep. So Sasha, then you've done all this homework, you come to rehearsal, you start working, and trying to figure out actually how to do the scene. Is it, what I observed about you, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, was that, that there was a lot of physical information that your body already had. You had a real strong sense of how it might go physically, and you needed to kind of figure that out before you could give yourself permission to just like let go and improvise.
No, I do work from a physical place, but I just think that's instinct, really. It's just, and you have it. We all have instinct constantly informing us. We just choose not to listen to it 90% of the time, or even more. And if you actually let it live and let it guide you, it's pretty dead on most of the time. Because I found like what we rehearsed almost from week one was basically what we did at the end, because it just felt right. But then you have to go, nah, that can't be right, it was too easy, and then go over here and complicate things, and then you come back and go, wait a minute, that was actually perfect.
And you started late as an actor.
Yeah, I got out of theater school, I was nearly 30.
But you
32 now.
you told me that last week you 32 and a half, is that what you said?
32 now.
So you told me that you were in a rock band
I was.
for a while,
Yeah.
and that was kind of what told you maybe acting would be a route for you?
Well, it certainly made acting seem so much easier than dealing with 3 other guys and living in a van. I was like, you know what? You know what would be great? Acting. That's just me. I could deal with just me. But I did. I was in my 20s. I played in a band, and we just toured. It was, amazing, and I would never want to do it again. But it was. But it propelled me in the sense that I realized, hey, this kind of worked, and why can't I really follow what it is that I want to do, which was something in this field. And so it gave me the courage to step into it and do it, because it is very solitary, and that is scary. Acting is very solitary. You work in conjunction with people, but your homework, your life, your career is very solitary. Whereas, if you're in a band or some other forms of creative entertainment, there's us against the world. This is you against the world, against whatever. I'm not fighting the world, but sometimes I am. Sometimes I am.
In your head you are.
In my head, there's a battle going on. There's a raging battle. But it is a very solitary and sometimes a very scary occupation.
Yeah. So one of the things that, how are we doing on time? What time is it? Nobody has a watch.
9:35.
9:35.
They're
Okay,
creative
so
times.
I'm gonna ask them one more question, and then we can take questions from you guys if you like. So one of the things that was curious to me in the rehearsal process, you guys, was the amount. You commented on the amount of props that I had you guys dealing with, in contrast to. One of the things you said, props are not your friend in television.
Well, they're my friend, but they can get you in trouble.
Can you say why?
Props for me they invest you in the world. You
know what a prop is?
Like a hammer or a
something that
hand,
something you
hold in your
hand on stage.
It's a property. So
Property.
props are your friend in the sense that they invest you in the world. So you're not just this kind of thing floating around. Like, I like leaning against the walls, because then you're in the room more than if you're just standing there. I like touching, so they're your friend in the sense that they invest you in the reality of the thing. And yet they can get you in trouble because when you're in film, you have to remember exactly how you picked up the goddamn spoon every freaking time. And then the editor, is like, well, he picked it up with his left hand and then he picked it up with his right hand, so he can't use that brilliant take because he picked it up with the wrong hand. You know what I mean? And that's not the stuff I want to be thinking about. I don't want to think about which hand. So you have to kind of integrate the technical stuff into your life so that it's not something that is really bothering you. You just say, this is how, but that's one of those things. It's like doing scales where you just have to integrate it into your behavior. Whereas in theater, props are more your friend because you don't have to do it the same way. Like the books, I'm still trying to figure out what I was doing with the books. Do you know what I mean? In that, but I loved it. When I figured out I could make a bookmark out of another piece of book and put the bookmark, and that was like I did that for probably 10 shows. I was like, I'm making bookmarks out of books. You know what I mean? I don't know what it means, but it was
totally not what I meant.
I know.
Oh.
Wait, I want to.
Are we out of time?
No, we're going to do, if we can,
We'll do the Q&A.
do a Q&A.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I want to ask you one question. One thing I noticed, I guess towards the end of the run, Sasha already referred to this in terms of how the physical lives were so almost identically, like you blocked the play. Kind of almost, I don't know if it was in your head, I don't know how far in advance you did it, I don't know if you did it between standing up and walking 10 feet to us in the room, but we wound up doing 90% of what the first block through kind of was, which is incredible to me, which just speaks to your instinct. Is that something that is normal for you, that you find that you don't really need to alter stuff, or was that, it just felt to me like your physical overlay was another text on the text. Like both acts I started down left, both acts he starts over here. Was that were you aware of all of that stuff, or was it just instinct?
What's so funny is the way you described it, because I would say there was a ton of evolution, but it was just very subtle. I mean, I had certainly the architecture, the shape it was going to take, and I knew, okay, at that point, he's probably going to chop the vegetables, and they're probably going to bring them to the table in that section. She's maybe going to go light some candles and lay on the pillow. But then exactly when you guys did what or how you interacted, you guys totally made that up.
So it was detailed. The details weren't settled, but the architecture.
Yeah. And then you guys made it come to life. So let's take a couple questions.
Absolutely. Do we have a, yes, ma'am, you right there.
You mentioned that your profession is solitary. How frustrating is it, or how fun is it, when you come together as an ensemble?
Did everybody hear that question? That's excellent. Good theater.
Ensemble, very good theater. The ensemble as in here in the theater or in general?
When you have more than just yourself on stage, when you're having to deal with another actor.
Well,
Is that frustrating or fun? Or
no, it's delightful. That's really what you want, at least for me. But I think most actors, they want to play. They want other people to work with. The reason Silas and I even did the play is because there isn't enough rehearsal. There isn't enough play. Sometimes in television, you just have to get on with it, and so you bring your work pretty much prepared for the day. Whereas the fun is in the discovery and coming together and everyone contributing from their life, from their vantage point. And so that to me is the ideal situation when you could all feed into something and create something together.
I would add, Sasha, in the week before we actually had audiences for the play, every time I mentioned it, Sasha would make a physical gesture like he was going to throw up. And I think there was a certain amount of terror. But then watching these two after they came off after the first night, and because you don't realize they don't get immediate feedback when they're shooting the television show. Here, all of a sudden you have 600 people that are responding to the story. It was like they were 5-year-olds. It was hilarious.
Another question. Yes, sir, you back in the middle there.
So I'm curious, when you have to short cycle this sort of baiting that you get to do on stage, and you just touched on it, and in television it's very different. My sense is so many of us in the creative enterprise now, we would love to write a novel, but we got to do the blog. We love to do the graphic novel, but we got to pump out the single graphic. So there's this short cycling that we spent the last 20 minutes beautifully articulating. And I don't know if you have any insights into how you do that. You still have to create fully embodied characters, but in a week instead of.
That's a great question. It's like, welcome to the 21st century, right? Like, everything is shrinking and yet more is happening in that space, which is totally upsetting in some way. For me, the idea is that the imagination and the fantasy function is a muscle that can be exercised. In fact, it must be exercised, otherwise it atrophies. And with exercise comes a dangerous word, but I'm going to use it anyway. With exercise comes efficiency. I'm not a fan of efficiency because I think messy is good. But when it comes to what you're talking about, I really think that the more you've practiced the long form, the easier it is to get deeper into something in less period of time because you're an athlete. You're an imaginary athlete. So your muscles are straight. You're like a wide receiver. You need to go this way, I'll go that way. You need to go over here, I can go over here. You want me to do it hanging upside down in the straitjacket? I got it, because the world is real enough to me. So I think it's kind of that, like, if you're practiced, then the short cycling is less of an issue. Whereas what's happening nowadays, I feel like people aren't practiced and they're short cycling, and then you get crap.
Chris, exactly. Is what Silas talking about the D word, discipline? Discipline?
Yeah, I think he described it beautifully. You know, the first page of An Actor Prepares, which was Stanislavski's kind of first treatise on the acting process, the first sentence is, the first requirement of an actor is a discipline of steel. And I remember reading that as a young actor and thinking, I don't understand that. That sounds, what you need is freedom, you need impulsiveness, you need emotional connection. What he meant was that your powers of observation, your willingness to sit with a script and try to imagine your way into that moment, it can be boring. it takes the same kind of discipline it takes to sit on the bike and do this.
It's doing scales, you know. My teacher would call it hours and hours of work alone in a room, solitary work with the story.
And I totally agree that you develop, that facility grows, but you have to have some capacity or something that is asking you to practice it on a regular basis, whether it's your own inner discipline or a group or whatever.
Yeah. Aristotle said it.
Is there anybody in the Wayback Machine? You, sir, right there.
You describe beautifully how it is that you get into a character or into a script, and you identify the point at which you have enough of a grasp on that you begin to think about the way the audience is going to read the performance, or the way the audience is going to think about the process.
I do my best not to think about that ever.
And so
Honestly.
that's the director's responsibility?
It's the thing that happens up in here between us. It's not my responsibility.
You know, Silas, one of the things that he revealed at some point early in the process is that he hates getting feedback from other actors after a scene has played about, oh, that went really well, or I really liked that one, or from anybody. No, from the director, yes, absolutely. Because he wants, as much as possible, to be able to continue living inside that imaginary world. Now, he says that, which means that consciously, now, some intuitive part of him knew completely how to dance with the audience. I mean, he would wait when there was a huge laughter, he would wait, but he's trying to figure out how you do that and still stay in the imaginary circumstance.
But, you know, yes, and you know, every actor has a different sort of approach, but we know there's 600 people in the room. I mean, it's not like we're going to disregard that, but you try to stay focused on this as much as you can, whilst at the same time doing the dance in order to involve everybody, include everybody. And that really only comes together once you start having an audience, because that's really we can do this all day long, but without an audience, it doesn't have the same life. So it is the final ingredient that we are aware of it, and we're in need of it, and that it's that coming together that really makes it an amazing experience.
Yes, sir.
So you've talked a lot about the solitary experience of being an actor, and you touched a little bit on what happens when you go together. When you're collaborating, when you're in a collaborative stage of the process, what do you hope for from a director, from another actor? What allows you to do your best work with the people that you're collaborating with?
I'm going to say one thing about Chris, which is amazing. He doesn't come at you with stuff. I've worked with directors who they know what it is. And your job is to kind of get where they've decided it lives. And it's a drag. Chris, in his incredible kind of openness and clarity, understands that it's about what happens between us, and he let us come with stuff, and then he shapes it. And so it's collaborative as opposed to kind of railroading. And I've been railroaded, and it's no fun. Like, what's the one? You could have anybody here. What am I doing here?
But that also depends on the people in the room, because and their level of skill and readiness and discipline. And when you have these guys, they're like, world-class athletes, and you do want to see what they're going to do, see what their instincts are telling them to do first, and that's the whole fun.
I would say trust is probably number one for me, where I trust the people, maybe because of their pedigree or just because of their nature, and then we're in the room together. You know that you can fall because it's okay to fall. It's okay to look foolish. It's okay because they're going to catch you, and they're going to help you get to where you need to get to.
Can you guys indulge me for 1 second about what we were just talking about patience and making anything in short cycling? This is from Middlemarch, which I'm reading, and it's a guy talking about his kind of shiftless artist son. And he says, I have insisted to him on what Aristotle has stated with admirable brevity, that for the achievement of any work regarded as an end, there must be a prior exercise of many energies or acquired facilities of a secondary order demanding patience. And that's what we're talking about. It's like in order to get You have to do those hours and hours and hours and hours of stuff in order to get to the point where you can do the thing that's worth calling an end. So I couldn't resist because I just read it like the other day.
Well, and with that wonderful cap, please thank Silas Weir Mitchell, Chris Coleman, and Sasha Roiz. Thank you very much, gentlemen.